The holographic projector at the center of the United Earth Assembly Hall crackled to life at 0300 hours, casting cold blue light across the faces of 7 billion people watching on screens around the world. Ambassador Yara Osemensa had not slept in 40 hours. Her charcoal blazer was pressed, her braids immaculate, but her eyes carried the weight of every sleepless night humanity had endured since first contact with the Galactic Council 12 years ago. The message had arrived without warning, as all Council messages did, beamed directly into every communication network on Earth simultaneously. The Council's chosen speaker, Archon Velthuris of the Sindari Collective, materialized in shimmering violet light above the podium. His elongated neck bore 3 ceremonial rings of office. His compound eyes held no emotion. They never did. People of the third planet, designation Sol 3, classification Terran Primitive, Velthuris began, his translated voice smooth as polished stone. The Galactic Council, representing 412 member civilizations spanning the Orion Arm, has convened in emergency session and reached a binding verdict. Earth stands guilty. The chamber erupted. Security forces in the gallery struggled to maintain order. Deputy Secretary Mako Ikaika, sitting 2 seats to Yara's left, grabbed her arm. His grip was tight enough to bruise. Guilty, Velthuris continued, unfazed by the chaos below him, of 14 counts of unsanctioned planetary expansion, 17 counts of unauthorized terraforming operations on bodies within contested space, and, most grievously, 1 count of wanton cognitive uplift performed upon the Dressel fauna of Kepler 442b without Council authorization. Yara knew about the Dressel. Everyone did. The mammals, 6-limbed, copper-furred, roughly the intelligence of a chimpanzee when humanity had found them, had been uplifted to sapience by Dr. Callum Nwachukwu and his team aboard the research vessel Perseverance 6 years ago. Earth had celebrated. The Council, it turned out, had other feelings. The sentence, Velthuris said, and the entire planet held its breath, is civilizational suspension. All Terran vessels beyond the orbit of Mars will be impounded. All colonial operations beyond the Sol system will cease within 40 standard cycles. Earth will accept a Council compliance observer aboard its central governing body and will submit to quarterly civilizational audits for a period of no less than 200 Earth years. He paused. Non-compliance will result in structural remediation. Everyone knew what structural remediation meant. They'd seen it happen to the breath of Tau Ceti, a world that had once held oceans and cities and 8 billion souls. Now it was a smooth, gray sphere, silent in the dark. The hologram flickered and died. Yara sat in absolute silence for 3 full seconds. Then she reached forward, uncapped the microphone in front of her, and said 7 words that would echo through every archive in the galaxy for 10,000 years. Tell the Council, we respectfully decline. The reaction inside the chamber was instant madness. But something else happened too, something no one had planned. From Cape Town to Calgary, from Jakarta to Juneau, the same words began to appear on protest signs, spray-painted on walls, projected onto buildings, trending across every platform simultaneously. Not with anger. With a cold, quiet certainty that felt, to those who watched it spread, like the entire species exhaling at once. We decline. General Priya Vasanthakumar of the United Earth Defense Force was already moving before Yara finished speaking. Compact, gray-templed, with the calm posture of someone who had spent 30 years making impossible decisions, she stepped to the secondary podium and addressed the room without dramatics. All UEDF assets stand by for authorization code Omega-7. Defensive posture effective immediately. I want our colony ships at Proxima, Tau Ceti, and Kepler to know we have not abandoned them. She looked directly at the camera. We have never abandoned anyone. In the hours that followed, the world did not panic. It mobilized. Emergency broadcasts explained, with calm precision, what the Council had said, what Earth had answered, and what was likely coming next. Schools were not closed. Hospitals remained open. Civilians were not told to hide. Instead, they were told the truth. Dr. Nwachukwu, now under house arrest pending Council extradition demands, gave a broadcast from his small apartment in Lagos. He was 61 years old, soft-spoken, and looked like someone's favorite grandfather. He held up a photograph of a Dressel child learning to paint. I will not apologize, he said simply. I will never apologize. The clip was viewed 40 billion times in a single day. Meanwhile, at the edge of the solar system, something extraordinary was happening. A Council enforcement fleet, 17 warships of the Sindari Vorath Combined Navy, had arrived and was holding position at the heliopause, watching. Waiting. assessing whether humanity's defiance was theater or something more dangerous. Admiral Jean Boichau, commanding the UEDF 7th Fleet from the bridge of the dreadnought Unyielding, opened a channel to the lead council vessel and transmitted a single document, Earth's formal declaration of non-compliance, signed by every member of the United Earth Assembly, translated into all 412 council languages. The council fleet did not move. But it did not leave either. In the assembly hall, with the world watching, Yara Osemensa set down her water glass, straightened her blazer, and began drafting humanity's opening arguments, because if this was going to be a trial, she intended to make the galaxy uncomfortable with the verdict. She wrote for 14 hours without stopping. When she was done, she had produced a 47-page document titled, On the Nature of Life, the Right of Cognition, and Why the Galactic Council Has Made a Catastrophic Mistake. It was the most widely read legal document in human history. And it was only the beginning. Commander Isayam Pafalarbi had been awake for so long that the coffee in her hand had stopped tasting like anything. The Meridian Research Station was not supposed to be a military installation. Officially, it housed astrophysics labs, a zero-gravity medical center, and the largest radio telescope array in the inner system. But in the 6 days since Ambassador Osemensa had spoken those 7 words in Geneva, Meridian had quietly become something else entirely. It had become the brain of humanity's war. Not a conventional war. Nobody in the UEDF was foolish enough to think 17 Council warships could simply be shot out of the sky. The Sindari Vorath Combined Navy had been building warships for 3,000 years. Their smallest patrol craft could glass a continent on a bad day. Humanity had been in space for 2 centuries. The technological gap was real, acknowledged, and completely irrelevant to what General Vasantha Kumar was planning. "Show me the numbers again," ESI said, pulling up the holographic display at the center of the main war room. Lieutenant Riku Hashimoto, 26 years old, obsessively precise, who had graduated top of his class at the UEDF Academy and still looked faintly alarmed by how fast everything was moving, pulled up the resource projections. 14 colony worlds confirmed responsive. Proxima Centauri B reports full civilian compliance and is requesting defensive armament. The Kepler colonies are already modifying their mining rigs. And the Dressel, he paused, clearly still processing this. The Dressel have formally requested to be included in the Defense Coalition. DSI stared at the display. The Dressel had been sapient for 6 years. 6 years. They had language, art, agriculture, and apparently a very clear opinion about who had given them those things and whether those people deserved to stand alone. "What can they actually offer?" she asked. "They've mapped every asteroid field in the Kepler 442 system," Riku said. "And their biology makes them naturally immune to the primary frequency of Sindari neural disruptors. They've been studying those disruptors since first contact and they think," he cleared his throat, "they think they can reverse engineer a countermeasure." Yasai set down her coffee. In 6 years of sapience, they figured out a counter to Council bioweapons. They had good teachers. Across the solar system, Earth's response was taking shape on 100 different fronts simultaneously, which was, as General Vasantha Kumar had explained to the Assembly, precisely the point. The Council expected panic. It expected political fracture, popular uprising, internal collapse. What no civilization in 400 years of Galactic Council history had ever done was look at a structural remediation order and reply with coordinated, calm, scalable resistance. Humanity, it turned out, was very good at being underestimated. At the University of Pretoria, Dr. Adiz Akonkobel, quantum physicist, 43, possessed of a laugh that could rattle windows and a mind that made her colleagues feel slightly inadequate, had spent the past 6 days doing something the Council's military advisors had not anticipated. She had been reading. Specifically, she had been reading every piece of intercepted Council communication, every fragment of technical data shared during the 12 years of formal contact, and every observation made by humanity's xenobiologists about Council ship architecture. What she found was fascinating. "Their shields," she announced to her team at 0400 on day 6, still wearing the same clothes she'd had on when the verdict dropped, "are built on the assumption that any attacking force will use directed energy weapons. Particle beams, plasma cannons, high-frequency lasers. Because that's what everyone in the Council uses. That's what you build when you've had 3,000 years to perfect a technology." She pulled up a schematic on the board behind her. "Nobody in the Orion Arm uses kinetics. Nobody throws rocks at warships anymore. It's considered barbaric. Pre-civilizational." She smiled in a way that her grad students had learned to interpret as either brilliant or terrifying, and usually both. "We have been launching rocks into space since 1957. The proposal she submitted to General Vasanthakumar 14 minutes later was 12 pages long and included 3 appendices. Vasanthakumar read it in under an hour, then made 2 calls. One was to the UEDF Chief of Weapons Development. The other was to the heads of every major asteroid mining operation in the belt. Meanwhile, in orbit above Earth, the Council's enforcement fleet received a curious transmission from Admiral Buchow aboard the Unyielding. It was not a threat. It was not a negotiation. It was an invitation to review a legal brief prepared by Ambassador Osemensa, specifically the sections concerning the cognitive rights of uplifted species, and to consider whether the Galactic Council's own charter, written in the early period of its founding, actually granted the authority it claimed to have. The Council's Fleet Admiral Virates 7 reviewed the brief, then reviewed it again, then forwarded it, quietly and without comment, to the Council's legal division. What Ambassador Osemensa had found, buried in footnotes and archaic linguistic constructs in the original Council Charter, was a clause that had never been invoked in 400 years of galactic governance. A provision written by the original founders, who had themselves been newer civilizations once, stating that civilizational suspension could not be applied to a species that had demonstrated compassionate act of uplift, defined as the voluntary elevation of another species to sapience, performed without self-interest, with full provision for the uplifted species' welfare. It was right there in the founding document. Nobody had ever used it because nobody had ever uplifted another species out of pure compassion before. Dr. Nwachukwu, still in his Lagos apartment, was watching the news when his phone rang. It was Yara. She sounded like she hadn't slept either. "Callum," she said, "I need you to tell me something. When you uplifted the Dressel, when you made that decision, did you think about what it would mean for Earth? For your career? For the political fallout?" He was quiet for a moment. "I thought about the look on the youngest one's face," he said, "when she realized she could ask questions." Yara closed her eyes. "That's exactly what I needed to hear." On the dark side of the moon, Commander Esi Mpafalarbi looked at the resource projections on her display, at the 14-colony world standing ready, at the Dressel sending their first-ever diplomatic transmission across the stars, and felt something settle in her chest. This was going to be the most consequential fight in human history. She was almost certain they were going to win it. The first shot was not fired by Earth. Humanity had made a calculation, deliberate, documented, and later studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries, that they would not initiate hostilities. Not from weakness but from strategy. The Council's enforcement fleet had authority to impound vessels and enforce the suspension order, and if they acted first, every legal argument Yara Osemensa had prepared would gain 10 times the weight. Moral clarity, General Vasanthakumar had written in her standing orders, is a weapon. Do not squander it. The Council fleet acted on day 14. 3 Sindari corvettes broke from the main formation and accelerated toward the mining vessel Cassiopeia's Daughter, a civilian ore hauler registered out of series, commanded by Captain Dolores Ibarra-Mendez, stout, sun-weathered, 58 years old, a grandmother who had been running the belt for 30 years and regarded all bureaucratic authority with the same flat skepticism she applied to equipment salespeople and weather forecasts. When the Council ships began transmitting impoundment orders in 17 languages, Dolores responded in one. No. Then she broadcast on every frequency available. "This is Captain Dolores Ibarra-Mendez of the Cassiopeia's Daughter, Civilian Registry, currently being approached by armed Council vessels with intent to illegally seize my ship. I am recording this. Everybody is watching. Do not do this." Everybody was, in fact, watching. The UEDF had seeded the region with observation drones, Admiral Buchow's idea, each one transmitting live on a public frequency accessible from Earth. When Fleet Admiral Virates 7's corvettes opened a tractor beam and began hauling the Cassiopeia's Daughter toward the impound formation, 4 billion people on Earth watched it happen in real time. 37 seconds later things changed. From 6 separate vectors UEDF fast response corvettes, smaller, faster and significantly less impressive looking than the Council ships, converged on the capture site. Lieutenant Commander Nadia Przybylska, commanding the Resolute, transmitted to the Council formation on the emergency channel. "This is UEDF Lieutenant Commander Przybylska. You are in the process of illegally seizing a civilian vessel of Earth Registry. Per the legal brief transmitted to your fleet command 12 days ago, your authority to execute this order is under active challenge in the Council's own courts. Stand down. Release the vessel. Let's not make this worse." Virates 7 was not accustomed to being addressed this way by a species that was, by every metric in the Council's civilizational database, 2 centuries old and technologically primitive. The Council's corvettes did not stand down. They locked weapons systems on the approaching UEDF ships. What happened next was something the Council had genuinely not anticipated. Dr. Okonkwo-Bell's kinetics program had been operational for exactly 9 days. It was not sophisticated by any standard the Council would recognize. It was essentially a very large electromagnetic rail system mounted on a captured asteroid designated Rock 7 by the Cassiopeia's daughter's crew, who had been quietly ferrying materials to it for 2 weeks. The projectiles it launched were not exploding. They were not guided. They were dense tungsten rods traveling at 0.4% the speed of light. They hit the lead Council corvette's shields in a pattern the shields were simply not designed to deflect. Not because the shields were weak, they were exceptional, but because no shield in Council history had been designed to account for unguided kinetic mass projectiles, because no civilization in 400 years of galactic history had thought to use them against a naval force. The corvette did not explode. Its shields held. But the impact sent it spinning out of formation, its tractor beam failing, the Cassiopeia's daughter lurching free. And the look on every Council tactical officer's face, had any human been present to see it, would have been remarkably informative. They did not recognize the weapon. They had protocols for particle beams, plasma weapons, antimatter detonations, graviton pulses, neural disruption fields. They did not have protocols for rocks. Varades 7 pulled his ships back. Not in retreat. The Council fleet could have destroyed every UEDF vessel at the heliopause if it chose to, but in a tactical pause, because his tactical officers were frantically scanning their databases for something that wasn't there. Lieutenant Commander Przybylska broadcast again. The Cassiopeia's daughter is proceeding to Ceres under UEDF escort. We are not attacking your fleet. We are defending our citizens. There is a difference. I suggest you appreciate it. On Earth, the video of the Cassiopeia's daughter spinning free of the Council's tractor beam played on every screen in the world. It was 11 seconds long. People watched it until the counter stopped counting. Captain Dolores Ibarra-Mendez, for her part, broadcast a brief message once her ship was clear and confirmed safe. She addressed it directly to Fleet Admiral Varades 7. I have 3 granddaughters, she said. The oldest one just turned 8. She wants to be an asteroid miner when she grows up. I intend to make sure she can. She paused. You have a decision to make. Make the right one. In the Council fleet, something unprecedented was happening. Varades 7 was receiving private messages from 3 of his ship commanders, not official communications but personal ones. Messages that used cautious language and diplomatic framing but communicated, if you read between the lines, something startling: discomfort. They had watched the Dressel uplift recordings. Yara's legal brief had circulated through the fleet. The junior officers were young, by Sindari standards, and young Sindari were apparently more susceptible to legal arguments and emotional appeals than their elders. Varades 7 did not respond to those messages. But he also did not order a second attempt to impound civilian vessels. He sent a transmission to Council Central. * recommend legal review before further enforcement action. Situation is non-standard. *. It was the most diplomatic understatement in Council history. Back on the Moon, Commander Esi Mpafalarbi watched the after-action reports with Lieutenant Hashimoto. The Resolute and its escort were undamaged. The Cassiopeia's daughter had a bent communications antenna. Rock 7 had expended 4% of its kinetic payload. Casualties? She asked. 0, Riku said. On both sides. Esi exhaled. Good. That was the point. She looked at the fleet positions on the display. They didn't shoot back. No. She picked up her cold coffee. They're thinking. She stared at the 17 dots representing Council warships holding position at the edge of human space. Council fleets don't usually think. They usually just act. She set the coffee down. Something's changing. She was right. She just didn't know yet how much. The Council's adjudication platform was a structure that existed to remind everyone of scale. 7 kilometers long, built from the hull metal of a dead star, it orbited nothing, belonged to no one, and had hosted the resolution of 74 interstellar conflicts in its 400-year history. Every surface was carved with the names of species that no longer existed, cautionary architecture. Ambassador Yara Osemensa arrived on it via a single UEDF shuttle with a crew of 4, carrying a tablet computer, 3 physical copies of her brief and nothing else. She had been told she could bring a security detail. She had declined. We don't need to look afraid, she had told General Vasantha Kumar before departure. The general had given her a long look. We're not afraid. Then let's not send mixed signals. The adjudication chamber held representatives from 40 council civilizations. Some were biological, some were digital constructs projected onto mobile platforms, some were gaseous entities contained in sealed atmospheric spheres. They ranged from civilizations 300 years old to one, the Murith, that predated Earth's last ice age. They had not expected a solo advocate from a 2-century-old civilization. They had expected a team of diplomats and lawyers, possibly in formal military dress, possibly with preemptive apologies. They got Yara. She was 44 years old. She had grown up in Kumasi, taken her law degree in The Hague, and spent 20 years in interstellar diplomacy before accepting the ambassadorship. She was precisely the kind of person who, in a room full of beings who had lived for centuries, could make you feel that human mortality was not a limitation but a sharpened focus. She began not with her brief but with a question. How many of you, she said, her voice carried by the chamber's universal translation system into 41 languages simultaneously, were once a young civilization? Silence. I don't mean that rhetorically. I mean specifically, how many of your species at some point in your history were exactly where humanity is now? Pre-stellar, slowly expanding, making mistakes, trying to figure out what you were and what your responsibilities were. She paused. Because I've read your histories. Most of you were. The Sindari were exploring their first neighboring worlds 2,000 years ago. The Murith had their expansion wars before they found the Council. The Pelthori drove 3 species to extinction before they understood what they were doing. She let that settle. None of you were suspended. None of you were threatened with structural remediation while you were still learning. The Sindari representative, not Velthuris who had delivered the verdict, but a younger official named Consortium Delegate Hari-9, raised a procedural hand. The crimes of which Earth stands guilty are not minor. Unauthorized expansion. Terraforming of contested worlds. The Dressel Uplift. The Dressel Uplift, Yara said, is the specific charge I want to address first, because it is the charge the Council is most confident about and the one where I believe the Council is most profoundly wrong. She pulled up the relevant section of the original charter on every display in the chamber. Article 12, subsection 4 of the Foundational Charter, written at the Council's formation by the original 7-member civilizations, which includes the Sindari. Compassionate act of uplift. The voluntary elevation of another species to sapience, performed without self-interest, with full provision for the uplifted species' welfare. She looked at Hari-9 directly. Dr. Callum Nwachukwu received no payment for the Dressel uplift. Earth gained no resources from Kepler 442b that it did not already have access to. The Dressel were provided with complete educational and welfare support, continued for the 6 years since their uplift at significant cost to Earth's colonial budget. And the Dressel themselves, sapient beings who now have the capacity to express preferences, have formally, in writing, stated their gratitude and their desire to stand with humanity. She clicked to the Dressel's diplomatic transmission, projected in full in the chamber. Article 12, subsection 4, does not merely permit what Dr. Nwachukwu did. It defines it as the highest possible expression of civilizational virtue. The chamber was very quiet. An atmospheric sphere in the back, containing the gaseous representative of the Orvithai communion, the oldest civilization present, pulsed 3 times in its species equivalent of laughter. She's right, the Orvithai said in a translation that made the words sound like wine through deep canyons. We know she's right. We all know. The question is whether we have the institutional courage to admit it. Yara pressed forward. The unauthorized expansion charges she addressed next, presenting evidence that the contested designations on 3 of the worlds in question had been applied retroactively, after human settlement, by Council member civilizations with commercial interests in those systems. She had the shipping records. She had the Council's own internal correspondence, obtained through a legal discovery request filed 16 days earlier that the Council had not expected to be processed so quickly. The room shifted. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But the slight adjustments in posture, or their alien equivalents, told a story. For 6 hours she argued. She was methodical, precise, and relentlessly calm. When Hari-9 attempted to redirect the proceedings to Earth's military posture at the heliopause, Yara acknowledged the Cassiopeia's daughter incident directly, described it as a lawful defense of a civilian vessel against unlawful seizure, and moved on before the objection could gain traction. When the Murith representative, ancient, slow-moving, built like a geological formation, asked why humanity had chosen defiance rather than compliance and appeal, Yara said, Because compliance with an unjust order is not patience. It is surrender. And we have children on 14 worlds whose futures depend on what precedent we set in this room today. We chose to fight because we believed the law was on our side. We chose to fight without initiating violence because we believed morality was on our side. And we came here alone with no weapons and no threats because we believe the council, at its best, is also on our side. She paused. Prove us right. She sat down. The chamber recessed for deliberation. Yara sat in the antechamber for 4 hours and 13 minutes. She drank water from a bottle she had brought from Earth. She read. She did not check communications. She did not strategize or prepare contingencies. She had said everything she intended to say. When the chamber reconvened, the Orvathai spokesperson, the oldest being in the room, spoke first. The adjudication chamber recommends suspension of enforcement action pending full legal review of the founding charter. Estimated duration, 40 standard cycles. A pause that carried in it something that felt, to Yara, like respect. The chamber also notes, for the record, that it has not heard arguments of this quality in 117 years. Yara transmitted the result to Earth before she stood up. Admiral Buchow received it on the bridge of the Unyielding and quietly ordered the fleet to stand down from combat readiness. Not to stand down entirely because the fight was not yet over, but to breathe. Dr. Nwachukwu was still in his apartment in Lagos when his phone showed the news. He sat quietly for a long time. Then he called his research team and told them to prepare for the next mission. 1 year after Archon Velthuris had declared Earth guilty before the eyes of the galaxy, a very different ceremony took place in the United Earth Assembly Hall. The projector at the center of the chamber was the same one. The blue holographic light was the same. But the figure that materialized above the podium this time was not Velthuris. It was Orvathai Eldest, the ancient gaseous spokesperson of the oldest civilization in the council, who had not left their home system in 40 years and whose presence at any gathering was, historically, a signal of extraordinary significance. Every channel on Earth carried the broadcast live. 14 colony worlds watched via relay. On Kepler 442b, in a settlement of copper-furred, six-limbed beings who had learned to ask questions 6 years ago, a crowd gathered in the central square around a screen that one of Dr. Nwachukwu's former students had helped them build and watched. Orvathai Eldest spoke slowly, as always, each word carrying the weight of a being who had watched civilizations rise and fall across 3,000 years. The Galactic Council's full legal review has been completed. The findings are as follows. General Vasanthakumar sat in the front row of the assembly chamber. Beside her, Yara Osemensa sat straight, hands folded, face unreadable. Admiral Buchow had come down from orbit for this. Dr. Nwachukwu was in the third row, wearing a suit he had borrowed because he had lost his own in a flood and hadn't gotten around to replacing it. Commander Esi Mpafalarbi watched from the moon. Lieutenant Riku Hashimoto watched from a duty station at Proxima. Captain Dolores Ibarra-Mendez watched from the bridge of the Cassiopeia's daughter, currently hauling or somewhere between Ceres and Jupiter, because life had continued and would continue to continue. First, Orvathai Eldest said. All 14 outstanding charges against Earth are formally dismissed. The Council's legal review has determined that Article 12, subsection 4 of the Founding Charter applies in full to the uplift of the Dressel fauna of Kepler 442b. Furthermore, the retroactive designation of contested territories used to support expansion charges has been ruled procedurally invalid and the territories in question are formally recognized as Terran colonial zones. The assembly chamber erupted. It took 3 minutes to quiet. Second, civilizational suspension order, case Sol 3, is rescinded with full prejudice. No future action may be taken on the basis of the dismissed charges. More eruption. Longer this time. Third, Orvathai Eldest paused in a way that made every person watching lean forward. The Council's legal review has resulted in an amendment to the Founding Charter, the first amendment in 180 years. The definition of compassionate act of uplift has been expanded and clarified. All future uplift actions performed in accordance with the expanded definition will receive immediate Council recognition and protection. The Dressel in Kepler 442b Central Square had a translation assistant present, a young Earth linguist named Petra Vasic who had spent 3 years with the community and spoke their language fluently. When Petra finished translating Orvathai Eldest's third point, the crowd responded in a way that she struggled later to describe accurately. It was not exactly celebration. It was something deeper than that. It was recognition. The formalization of a fact the Dressel had understood in their bones for a year. They were real, they were acknowledged, and the species that had made them so had not been punished for it. One of the Dressel elders, a female named Vareth Coppersong who was 7 years sapient and had spent 4 of those years studying law, placed a hand on Petra's arm. "Tell the humans," Vareth Coppersong said, "that we will remember." On Earth, the celebrations were significant but not wild. Humanity had learned something in the past year, had relearned something it had always known but occasionally forgotten, which was that crises are not resolved by joy but by work, and that the right response to winning a fight is to prepare for the next argument, not to assume no more arguments are coming. General Vasantha Kumar did not celebrate publicly. She issued a memo to all UEDF commands that read, *Stand down from combat readiness. Maintain defensive posture. The mission is unchanged. Protect our people, preserve our values, honor our commitments. It was 4 lines long and said everything that needed to be said. Dr. Nwachukwu gave one final interview before returning to his research. The interviewer asked him how he felt about the verdict being overturned, about being vindicated, about the year of house arrest and political pressure and global scrutiny. He thought for a moment. "I spent a year worrying that I'd hurt the people I was trying to help," he said. "The Dressel, I mean. That by uplifting them I'd made them the center of an interstellar crisis they had no part in creating. That was the hardest thing. Not the house arrest." He looked at the interviewer. "But Vareth Coppersong sent me a message last week. She said, 'We know what you risked. We are grateful for every part of it, including the difficult parts, because the difficult parts are how we knew it was real.'" He was quiet for a moment. "A 7-year-old civilization sent me that. 7 years of sapience and they've already figured something out that takes most humans decades." Yara Ose Mensah, in the weeks after the verdict, was invited to address the full Galactic Council, not in a defensive context, not as an accused party but as a speaker. The first human ever to address the full council in that capacity. She accepted. Her speech was 40 minutes long and covered, in precise and courteous terms, the structural flaws in the council's enforcement mechanisms, the need for reform of the contested territory designation system, and a proposal for a new council committee focused on young civilizations, one that would offer guidance rather than judgment, cooperation rather than compliance. Orvath Eldest, who was present, endorsed the proposal before the speech was finished. The committee was established 14 months later. Humanity was given a founding seat. Admiral Buchow returned to orbit after the ceremonies and stood on the bridge of the Unyielding, looking at the stars. 37 years in the UEDF. He had expected to spend his career deterring smaller-scale threats. Rogue states, belt piracy, the occasional corporate fleet with territorial ambitions. He had not expected to spend his final years in service holding a defensive line at the edge of human space against 400 civilizations and winning without firing a single weapon that killed anyone. He had also not expected to feel at the end of it, not triumphant exactly, but something quieter and more durable. Proud. Of the species he served. Of the ambassador who argued for 6 hours in alien silence. Of the scientist who uplifted a child and refused to apologize. Of the mining captain who said no and kept her appointment with tomorrow. Of the lieutenant commander who held the line and asked for the right thing with words rather than fire. Of the young officer who kept the data current and the old general who kept the strategy clear. Of all of them. Of the stubborn, brilliant, infuriating, compassionate species that had looked at the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy and said, "We respectfully decline." And had been right. In the Dressel settlement on Kepler 442b, Vareth Coppersong sat at a desk, an Earth-style desk, given to her by Dr. Nwachukwu's team, and wrote. She was composing the first history of her people. Who they had been before, who they had become, what had been given to them and what that gift had cost the givers and why it had been worth it anyway. She did not yet know what the full title would be. But she knew the first line. Once we could not ask questions. Then, someone decided that was unacceptable. She wrote for a long time. Outside her window, the sun of Kepler 442 was rising over a world that had been transformed twice, first by geology then by compassion, and the light falling across copper fur and new-made language was neither harsh nor gentle but honest, as light always is. Inside the United Earth Assembly Hall in Geneva, the holographic projector was quiet. The chamber was empty. The chairs were set in their rows. The microphone sat on its stand. On the wall above the entrance, someone, nobody had claimed responsibility, probably nobody ever would, had etched 7 words in small, neat letters into the stone. We respectfully decline. We are still here. Humanity had been declared guilty by the most powerful authority in the galaxy. They had responded with arguments, ingenuity, solidarity, a grandmother's defiance, a scientist's courage, an ambassador's voice, and the love of a species that uplifted others not for advantage but because it was the right thing to do. They had not been destroyed. They had not been diminished. They had, in the process, changed the law. That was enough. That was everything. That, in the end, was what humanity had always done. It pushed forward. It carried others. It argued with the universe until the universe listened. And when the stars called it guilty, it looked up at them and answered, "Prove it."